What's going on, guys? My name is Christopher and welcome to It's Complicated. It is a show where I talk about and showcase mostly mechanical wristwatches. Today, we're going to be talking about the made in Japan version of the Seiko SKX007. Here we go. Now, this showcase is going to be a little different than a typical showcase on this show. This time, I'm going to be pointing out all of the things on this watch that I think are better than the Malaysian version of this timepiece. So here it is, the SKX007 made in Japan version. I would have loved to have both this watch and the Malaysian version of this watch that I did own, but I made a trade to get this one that included giving up my old SKX007 as part of that trade. But I did do a showcase of that one, so I'll put a link to that in the description below. Now, the old SKX007 wasn't a bad watch at all, and I did get a couple of years of enjoyment out of it. I never disliked it, but it wasn't keeping great time. I even made a video called My SKX007 is Running Wild. So before we go on any further, let's take a look at how this watch is keeping time. And this is how the SKX007 has been keeping time. I've had it on this machine for quite a while, and it's really anywhere between plus 4 seconds a day and plus 10 seconds a day. It seems to be leveling out around plus 6 seconds, plus 7 seconds, but you really never know. I think part of the popularity of this watch, especially when they were still being manufactured for under $300, you're gonna have a hard time finding a mechanical watch that does day and date and has decent timekeeping. And really, not including this watch's timekeeping, the made in Japan version of this timepiece is really a much better watch. Now, I did get this one on that Seiko Jubilee bracelet, but for now, I just put it on a Bond style NATO strap from the boys over at Phenomenato. I mentioned them before on the show, but these straps are of Omega NATO quality for a third of the price. High quality stuff for 40 bucks. If you live in the United States, though, keep in mind it's going to take a little bit to get to you. But man, I have noticed that lately these watches have really shot up in value, especially on the Jubilee bracelet. They're selling for over $500 with the box. That's more than twice what the Malaysian SKX007 is selling for. Pretty wild stuff. Now, I keep talking about differences and everything, and let's go over some of those differences. For one, just look at the polish on that. You can even see my shirt, really. You can see the phone. You can see a lot of things because that polish is very, very good. And the brushed steel parts of this watch just pop a little more than it did on the Malaysian version. You can really just see that the brushed part is just much more defined from that mirror polishing part, and I don't think that the Malaysian version was really that defined. But oh boy, lots of differences on the dial here. First of all, that Divers 200 meter, that is just so much thicker, and because it's thicker, it almost makes it look like it's a darker version of that orange. And while it is the same color, that thickness really does make it pop. Plus, the Malaysian version doesn't have that 21 jewels underneath of the Divers 200 meter. And of course, on the Malaysian version, you're not going to get that made in Japan on the bottom of the dial. Another big difference between the made in Japan Seiko and the Malaysian Seiko is the made in Japan Seiko has like thicker indices. They're not wider, they're taller, if that makes any sense. It's like they put more of the lume on that dial. And speaking of lume, check out the lume on this Seiko too. I mean, it glows well and it holds a charge for a pretty decent amount of time. Now, the SKX007 does feature a 120 click unidirectional rotating bezel, and this one just turns so much easier than the Malaysian one that I had. The Malaysian one that I had always felt kind of gooey, I guess. It was a little more difficult to turn, but the Malaysian version one that I did have was actually perfectly aligned up top there. And this one is just off to the left. It's barely off, but it's off. If I can get it. Yeah, there you can see it better. It's just off to the left there. If I turn it this way, it's just classic Seiko for it to be off a little bit. Now, the crystal is going to be the same and the movement is going to be the same. But as I showed you guys earlier, for right now, this made in Japan SKX007 is keeping much better time. Case backs are pretty much going to be the same on both versions. You're just not going to have that Japan on the Malaysian versions. Now, a watch like this is really part of the joys of watch collecting, isn't it? All of those little differences, they make this watch worth so much more money over at the Malaysian version. I mean, as of right now, you're talking it's worth well over double what the Malaysian version is worth. And I think that its value is going to kind of keep climbing as this watch was released, I believe, in the late 90s. They made it for a long time, but man, people loved this watch. And if you love this watch, the Made in Japan version is absolutely the way to go. And there it is on the wrist. Just a fantastic looking timepiece from the boys over at Seiko. And look at that NATO strap. I can't recommend those guys over at Phenomenato enough. They didn't pay me to say that either. One thing I did want to mention before I end the show is that the crown on this one is a little easier to screw down. On the SKX007J that I had to fiddle with it a little more to get it to catch on those threads. So there you have it, guys. There is a lot of differences between the SKX007J and the SKX007K. They are minor differences, but they do add up to make the Made in Japan version of the SKX007 a much better watch, and one that is worth quite a bit more money. Those SKX007Ks, they're only worth about 250 bucks, even on a Jubilee, where this one on a Jubilee is worth over 500 US dollars. And that wraps it up for another episode of It's Complicated. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video, please share it with a couple of your buddies. I would appreciate that. And we'll see you next time on another episode of It's Complicated.